Howdy, and welcome back to the Redmond Reviews, a very special series that we're doing on the AlphaGo self-played series. I'm Chris Garlock, the managing editor of the American Go e-journal, joined, of course, by Michael Redmond. Michael, how are you doing?
Hi, Chris. I'm fine.
I know it's early there. They're in Japan, so thanks for getting up to do this. I'm very excited to be back. I've kind of been missing these games, so it's going to be good to see. So tell us, this is game 5.
Yeah.
What's the overall takeaway from this game?
Well, you know, it starts sort of strange with a lot of AlphaGo moves. The flow of the game is very strange in the beginning, and so I'm going to be sort of guessing a little bit to try to explain why I think AlphaGo might be playing these moves. And then in the middle game, it settles down a little bit. It's an exciting middle game, but it's fairly straightforward in that the fights happen once at a time. Like it's not like some of those games like game number 2 where you have all sort of stuff happening all over the place at the same time. It's more organized, you might say, into one fight at a time, and in that way it's going to be easier for me to explain. And it ends up turning into a very nice end game, a very beautiful end game, I think.
Ooh, all right. Well, let's take a look at it. Get started.
Okay. Well, just to start with the opening moves, we have 2, 3, 4 points with white. And when AlphaGo plays the star points, I think it has a tendency to like to play the high card, but it can play a low card too. And of course, when Black has played a high Kakari here, almost all the time White's going to play the attachment underneath. And so we see that AlphaGo is playing, in a way, is avoiding complicated josekis, you might say. It has the josekis that it likes. And by saying it likes them, I suppose they just give it a good winning percentage compared to other joseki. But this is just one of its favorites, joseki. So when AlphaGo is playing itself, it's going to be playing this joseki. But of course, when it's playing a human, maybe the human will play a pincer or something, and then we'll see different kind of, or the human might try to play the Nadara joseki, the avalanche joseki. So that would change things. But when AlphaGo is playing itself, it likes this joseki with white and black. But it's interesting at this point because you would expect a human player to play an extension on the upper side.
Without even thinking about it, yeah, absolutely.
Without thinking about it, right. This is the natural move. Black has invested 3 stones there in the upper left, and it's natural for Black to build on this towards the upper side, right? So it's a very natural move. But AlphaGo doesn't do that. And like AlphaGo isn't even playing on the right side of the board. In general, even if Black doesn't play this move, I would sort of expect Black to be playing maybe the Sanninsei on the right or something on the right hand of the board because that's the direction Black's stones are pointing. And so this move, it actually, since it's not making direct use of the marked stones, it looks a bit strange to me.
I just remember when I was first, learning and then studying, with some teachers, and you play a move like that. I don't think even I ever played something that much away. I might have played something like maybe 2 or 3 space jump, with some sort of crazy idea about, forming a big moyo.
Well, after AlphaGo, that looks a pretty normal move. Yeah. And actually, this Kakari here, yeah, it's strange looking to me, but thinking about it, it is a Kakari, which is like the proverb says the Kakari comes first after taking the open corner.
Sure.
And so it is the kind of move you might expect AlphaGo to has a default move. It's a big opening move. And the reason I don't like the look of it is because it's in a part of the board that is not very high priority for me. Just because white has such a solid shape there in the upper left. So that's why it looks small to me. And to most stronger players, I think.
Right.
And so now with white, I would expect white to play a pincer on the upper side, right?
Absolutely.
Let's see, I have the variation in there. And all sorts of stuff could happen, like maybe something like this, a fight on the upper side, or maybe black would jump out. This is a move that AlphaGo likes.
Yeah.
And then white would play a Kakari on the upper side and something like this. And so just splitting the upper side, my feeling is that that wall on the left that black has made is it's not really working very well. And so this seems the natural thing for white to be doing. But AlphaGo is white doesn't do that. White plays a Kakari. And now black plays here. And so the flow of moves here is very strange because this move is a feasible move that black can play instead of playing this move. This is a feasible move that works in a way, you might say. But if black is going to play there, I would play it in the beginning from this position.
Sure.
Like, and so what's this Kakari? What's this exchange of two Kakaris, which both seem to be moves, to my feeling is that they both should be played somewhere on the upper side. And then black switches to the upper side. After white has played this Kakari against black stone in the lower right, it seems sort of schizophrenic. It doesn't make sense.
That's one word.
Yeah. And then, you know, I just wonder,
is it a timing thing? I mean, do you think?
It just seems much more natural for black to have played this move that just came here first. Yeah. And then if white does play the Kakari anyway, black's going to play a pincer on the right side.
Right.
And so that stone in the lower left seems to be not in the optimal point. It's not in a good place. But then, you know, again, I would, at this point, I'm sort of expecting white to play a double Kakari on the lower side. White doesn't do that. So after this, now this could have been played in a completely different order of moves, but it's starting to look almost normal. Now that they've sort of paid respect to each other's strange order of moves, it's all settled down. So black has played the upper side first, and white erased the moyo, and now the rest of the board is looking pretty normal now also. So it's after those first few strange moves, nothing unusual happened after that. It sort of settled down a little bit, and now it's looking like a normal game at this point. And now white plays this move. This is another move, like locally here. This is sort of the default move in the lower left corner when black plays a low Kakari. But it makes sense that AlphaGo is playing here because the left side as a whole is not very big. And so white's sort of trying to push black towards the left side of the board. In other words, at this point, let's see, this is the game move. But if black plays something like this, then black will be, locally it's a very good shape for black. It's a wall of 2 with an extension of three lines. So it's a good shape for black locally, but it's pointing towards that white group in the upper left, which is very solid. And so the left side, in general, is not a very big point. It's not a big area.
Right.
And so that's the idea behind this move that white played, by sort of pushing black towards the left side. And so people used to tell you off for playing this. Well, I guess we can call it a joseki now because pros are playing it too. But it's really good in a position where the left side there is not very important, and you would like to force your opponent to play that side. And now black extends. Now this is a pretty important move towards the upper side, and it's a point where white could have played too. And then white extends on the left side. So this is, everything has become a bit more peaceful at this time. For instance, black could have played this attack here to try to attack white on the right side. And something like this could happen. And white does have a heavy shape, actually, with both groups. So this is maybe not what AlphaGo is going to do about it. I sort of like this variation for black. Of course, when black plays this move, you often see that AlphaGo does not always extend, but I have trouble finding any other good-looking move. So this is the variation that I would make. But it really looks good for black from my viewpoint. So I'm sort of wondering why black doesn't do that. And this is one of the positions where I would like to, it would be interesting to have direct access to AlphaGo's networks and be able to ask what the policy network shows as a variation that's going to happen now. And of course, at this point, we still don't have access to the network, so we just don't know what AlphaGo is thinking when it plays these moves. And it's probably a few versions ahead now too. By
the way, this just reminded me that when we released those videos, Demesis Abyss from DeepMind, I think he retweeted our announcement about them, which probably, since he's got a lot of followers, that's probably part of what helped us to get all those views. So,
I think I saw that. Yeah, it was in the journal, right?
Yeah,
I think put it in the journal. Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah, that was nice. Yeah, it pointed me towards Hasabis's page, his Twitter. Yeah. And so, yeah, so white extends on the right side. So this is, so we have three white groups that are fairly well settled. Like the two left side corners are territory now. And the right side white group is, it's not really territory, but it's it's getting there. It's getting to be a fairly safe group. And then there's that white group on the upper side. Black has the two corner territories. And since they are star point territories, they're not really territory yet. There's still the invasions in the corner. And this group in the upper left, there's not very much black territory to speak of. But black does have a lot of thickness, you might say. And then there's that black group on the left side, which black is not doing anything about. And it's not really all that important. But we're going to see stuff happening there later. And so black plays this double extension that you're not supposed to play from a star point. And it's sort of working in this position because although there is a weakness at the 3-3 point, this move is more about attacking white. So it's starting to attack white on the right side, and also it's black is sort of building a framework to start to attack white on the upper side too. So that's the idea behind this move. Although you're not really supposed to play a double extension from the star point because it's going to allow your opponent to jump into the 3-3 point. In this case, it's working. It's going to work to a certain extent because of the fact that black's trying to attack white on the outside. And white finally plays the pincer here. This is, although I continued saying that the left side is not very important, when you start to run out of sides to play, it's going to be important anyway. So this is a good time for white to be playing a pincer on the left side. And let's see, if black runs away, maybe white's going to be playing here. And we can see this is starting to affect black on the upper side. So black's going to play something maybe like this. And you can see that white's plays on the left side are working well with this white stone at A, and white's getting a bit of a structure there, kind of a moyo, and is still attacking black in the lower left. So this is kind of the idea that I would expect white has when white plays this pincer on the left side. And so black plays here. AlphaGo plays these jumps toward the center fairly early in all of its games. So it's considering this to be a very big move. And as you see in this game, it's playing this jump towards the center instead of an extension on the side. So the jump towards the center is generally considered to be actually more important maybe than the extension to the side, or at least similar in importance. And in this case, it's a very good move because it reduces white's potential on the left side.
Is that a move that a top pro would play? I mean, it just seems, from everything that we're taught that black would want to try and get some sort of base. He has no base right now. Yeah. Well, if you look at the upper side, you can see that if any move, white has a very loose shape there, a very weak shape, and so any move that white makes is not going to be good enough to make a base for white. And so it's a position where black would like to be attacking on a large scale. And so an extension towards the side, like we're seeing in this variation here, is not very satisfying because it's going to be taking white on a small scale. Small scale, gotcha. Okay. So a professional also would want to play towards the center like this because it's making the upper side
the most important part of the board. Okay. And actually, that's a good point that you brought me to, because a lot of Black's plays here are just aimed at making the upper side important. Because White's trying to start something on the left side of the board. And Black doesn't want to be pushed around here. So Black is continuing to play on the upper side, and every move Black plays is going to make the upper side more and more important. And we're going to see that happening. Because we can see White is still trying to attack White. And if White is trying to attack Black.
Right.
And if Black is going to run away with these two stones, then it's going to be, White can chase that around, and it's going to be fairly easy for White to deal with the upper side. And so Black starts with this attack on the right. And all of Black's plays here are actually, although this start fights on the right side, Black is focusing on the upper side to a certain degree. And locally here, if White plays strongly, Black's going to be able to break through like this. So this is a kind of a sequence that you often see as a bad variation for White, because White's just split in two and has two weak groups, one on each side. So this is dangerous for White. So this is what Black is aiming at. And White plays a very AI-like move. This is it just plays away, and is, you might think it's even ignoring Black's attack, but just playing very lightly, and de-emphasizing the right side. So I agree with this because the fact that White is not fighting on the right side of the board, it actually is going to make the invasions to the three points in the upper right corner especially, but also in the lower right corner, will make them very effective moves. The fact that White is just giving that area to Black, and White is getting something back on the left half of the board. So although those are moves that would be hard for me to think of intuitively, this move especially, it is a very AlphaGo-like move. It's one of AlphaGo's favorites move. And I see it actually working in this position. Like the direct fight here is going to be bad for White. So White has to find some way to dodge away from that fight. So I agree with that. And now White surrounds the Black group on the left. There's still some room for Black to make life, which is going to happen later. And the fact that AlphaGo now starts to handle each of these fights one at a time is going to make it easier for me to comment on the game, because the actual game sequence is actually going to explain a lot of these questions that people will have about what's going to happen on the left side, stuff like that. And so this is a move that I love. This is the moves that AlphaGo makes towards the center of the board are really, I like them a lot. And this is a move I would never have thought to play. And again, I'm going to repeat myself and say that this is a move that is emphasizing the upper side. It's making the next move on the upper side really important. Like if White plays something like this, the left side is going to be White's territory. But this move at A has made capturing the upper side. This is going to be a Black territory on the upper side. And Black is surrounding that territory on the 7th line or something like that. It's just too much territory. It's going to be sort of connect up to the right side. And if we ignore the fact that there is some Aji in the 3-3 point, it's already approaching something like 100 points, so it's too big.
Wow.
And so White has to answer this. So this is a way that Black can actually take control of the game to a certain extent by forcing White to play on the upper side. And White plays here, and Black plays here. This is a move you sometimes see. Black it's a kind of a probe move. Is White going to connect at the 3-3 point or try something else? And the way Black continues is going to change a little bit depending how White plays.
Just back on the White move.
Yeah.
It's an interesting choice, because I would have thought just sort of instinctively.
You would think White would run away, right?
Just something light is what you right. I mean, sort of similar to the way
something like this.
Or like the dodge away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, but connecting, it seems.
It looks like a heavy move.
It does.
The idea is that, and it's a bit worrying. I think that there is the question is what happens if Black surrounds that White group? Is White going to be able to live? And actually, like if Black plays something like this, White's probably going to cover here. It's going to be a fight. But I have the feeling that white should be able to make a life. And if white does succeed in that, then white's going to be erasing a lot of black territory in the process. Like if we're going to have something like this happen and something like this happen, we can see the black stones there. The 3 black stones are getting into Damezimari a little bit. And so when white does eventually live, there's going to be some damage done to potential black territory. And so it's frightening for white. I would find it frightening for white too. But it's also frightening for black, this variation. So it's a dangerous variation for both sides. And the reason I didn't originally have a variation for this move is because it's really difficult for me to give an exact variation that shows how white can live, because I can't really see it myself. Yeah.
It's just
and so this is a kind of, this is a probe that black is making to see how white reacts locally. And I would expect that even AlphaGo is sort of expecting white to answer here. That AlphaGo is black, and so it's interesting that white just ignores it. And black can cut here, and white plays here. So black can break through there. Black can play here to break through on the left side. But in itself, it's not such a big move. Like black can get a very good shape here. But it doesn't affect white's stones on the upper side. That black really needs a stone at A to start attacking white on the upper side. And so it's just the value of this sequence for black is that black has made a living shape. And so when white plays away, this hasn't been so effective for black, but it has strengthened the black group there. And so it's sort of hard to judge. Like maybe black shouldn't have played that probe at this probe here anyway. It turned out it wasn't forcing. But it is a kind of a point in the game where black would like to see how white's going to answer this. Like if white plays this move, then black's going to have a forcing move here. Actually, black's going to do it in this order. Black's going to play like this, and then play the forcing move here. So this will change stuff that will happen in the upper side. It's going to change the position in the upper side a little bit. Or otherwise, if white instead answers this way, it's going to give black a bit more, like even moves like this in a pinch, black would be able to play this, and it would usually be sente. So it would strengthen the black group to a certain extent, this time towards the center. And of course, black would usually follow with this move, and again, in some cases, that exchange in the corner can be a good exchange for black. And so it's a kind of a probe move, and the way black plays is going to change depending on how white reacts. So it's a move you sort of want to play, but when white plays away like this, one wonders if it was a good move after all. And so it's a question in my mind. I haven't really solved that one. And black doesn't do that. Instead, black plays here. And this is a really good move towards the right side. It's starting to, if we look at the right side, that's a whole area where black has potential to make a territory. And so while attacking, now that white has played 2 moves to strengthen that upper side group, black is just chasing it out now. And black is happy with the fact that black always has that sequence, black has that sequence, let's see, which one is it? This sequence on the left. Black can always use this to strengthen the black group if the black group happens to get weak. And so, in effect, black has made miai of that move on the left side to a move on the upper side. So the black group on the left is fairly strong. And white runs out. Oh, white played here once. Okay, so white played here after all. And black plays the extension. And so these 2 points were miai, you might say.
Right.
And now black has a nice box shape there with enough room for eyes. And for the time being, white doesn't have eyes on the upper side. So it's a good time for white to move out with this move. And so at this point, white is out in the center. Black has gained something in the upper right area a little bit with that knight's move. And the black group on the upper side is strong enough now that black can leave it. So this is a good time. It seems a sensible time for black to be switching to the left side. And so suddenly, after that strange opening, AlphaGo is looking sort of reasonable. It's looking like a normal player now, and it's playing moves that I can understand.
I was thinking that this sequence is coming up here, which I didn't study deeply. I was just looking at it. It's a really interesting Sumego problem, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of Sumego variations. I actually think AlphaGo messed up, but it's basic. It's what I'm saying is that it chose thickness instead of territory,
right?
And in a position where I would have taken the territory. So maybe it's a judgment thing,
right?
So let's get into that.
Yes.
It's really hard for white to kill the black group, partly because there's a cutting point in white's shape there on the left, and the latter favors black, of course. So there's some weakness there for white. And that's shown in this move where white is playing thickly on top. And black plays here. And now there's this move. This is really an interesting move.
It's sharp.
It's trying to get, it's a very sharp move. Like you would expect black just to play here and here. And actually this variation would be good for black. So I'm going to put another variation in here. This is actually alive already. It's alive as it stands. So this would be good for black. Black can play, if white plays at A, black can just play from underneath at B. Right. So this black group is alive. But actually I'm going to put another variation in because I think what white is going to do now is white is probably going to play here. And something like this is going to happen. And black can live with this move. So it's alive. But white can get sente. So this is something that I expect will happen. In the actual game, let's get back to that. In the actual game, black played this wedge here, which is trying to get a little bit more. Like if white plays here, black's going to pull back and then play this move. And we're going to, it's going to be one of those two variations. Like it could be this one, or it could be white playing the cut. In either case, black has reduced white's territory a little bit on the lower side. And let's just go into this variation. And when this happens, there's that cut at A that's left behind. So there's just a slight bit more aji on the lower side for black to make use of later in the game. Just because there's this forcing move at A. It's a slight difference that is good for black. And so black is trying to force white down onto the second line with this move. And what white does is white counters with this move, and black comes down. And it gets exciting now. Like if white plays, if white simply tries to capture it, black's going to use this move to break out into the center. So this would be good for black. Black still has an option to live on the side with A. And so breaking out into the center is pretty good for black here. And so instead, white pushes here. This is a good move. And if black tries to escape with the two stones, white's going to win the semi. White's going to play this Hanesugi, which is a kind of a key point here. And even though if we look at the lower left corner as an isolated Sumego problem, it's going to be easy for black to kill that shape. But of course, black stones are going to die first. And so black cuts once and then plays this hunt. So black has to play this point and allows white to capture the two stones. And now this is really, this is exciting because most players wouldn't think to play this move. Like there's other ways that black can make a life. But playing here first is actually pretty good. Like if white covers, then it's going to be 100% sente, because if white plays here, black lives. This is actually how I would play with white. But if white doesn't play that move, if white plays here, then black's going to capture these white stones. Right. So that's bad for. And so black plays here, and I'm going to say that this is just answering it like this is what white should have done, and we're going to end up with this position. And black has about 6 points on the side. White has a nice territory in the lower left corner. This final move is actually necessary because there's a really neat Sumego problem. I'll just leave it here. This is going to turn into a kind of a ko. And
that's
so,
right. That's right. It's in the SGF file, folks. You can take a look at it.
We'll just leave it there to make sure people take a look at the SGF file. Yeah. But it's this variation where black gets into trouble. It's a ko. And so black has to answer here. And so it's a relatively small black territory. While in the actual game, what white did is white played here. And let's just go into the game variation here. Black plays the squeeze here and gets what amounts to 8 points of territory on the side. So it's a bit extra. It's 2 extra points of black's territory. And the whole corner territory for white has disappeared. And so that's a difference of 7 points. And so in all, black has gained 9 points.
Right.
White has gained, white is going to capture that black zone. So white's gained a few points in the center. Where white has played Atari, like white can play here, and white's going to get some extra points there. That's going to amount to a total of 4 points for white after black has gained 9 points, which means that as a total, black has gained 5 points in this exchange compared to the actual game. I mean, compared to the variation that I'm showing.
Right, that's a lot of points.
That's compared to this variation. Black has gained 5 points. And the difference for the advantage for white is in this position, white, there's some weakness in the center for white. Like there's a peep in the center there that black can play later. White's not quite as thick in the center as in this case.
Okay.
So there's a difference there. And so the question is this thickness worth a loss of 5 points? And I would say no, definitely not.
Interesting.
In fact, that in most games, that thickness would not amount to anything. I mean, the potential for black to play a peep or anything like that, it would not be a major problem for white. But there is a real difference there, and the question is, how do you judge it? And I would guess, to speak for AlphaGo, I would say maybe AlphaGo thinks it's that important, but I would not make that judgment. I would say 5 points is definitely more important. And so this is a point where I'm questioning AlphaGo's judgment in the position.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really, really interesting. So it's not a mistake per se. It's really a judgment, and you'd think that
judgment that I don't agree with. Yeah.
Right, but this is sort of the area. Unlike the opening with those just sort of crazy moves, this seems like a part of the game that AlphaGo should be fairly straightforward, right? I mean, to make these kind of calculations.
Yeah, well, it's actually sort of hard to call. Like, although 5 points is huge, in some games the difference on the outside would be pretty important too. So it depends on how you judge. I think even human players would have a slightly different call on that. But with 5 points, I think it's a bit too big. Like if it was more like 3 points, then maybe I would be leaning towards AlphaGo's choice.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so to get on with the game. White jumps into the 3-3 point. Now this is well timed because, and the reason it's well timed is that white will just follow up with what white does. White's about to play this move to strengthen the upper side group. And so if we assume that black is going to continue answering on the right side, if all of that stuff in the center of the board is going to happen first, that's going to change how black answers this move. Like, for instance, black would like to be able to kill this cornerstone with the knight's move. These moves to the second line, this is a move that black uses when black is trying to kill the 3-3 invasion. But right now, at this moment in the game, it doesn't look like it's going to work because white can force with this, and white can play here. And I put a little variation where black tries to kill white, and it's actually pretty close. But at this point, with the weakness at A and that open space there, it's not going to work for black. It's just too dangerous. And so this is the perfect timing. This is the moment in the game where this move is looking like it's not going to work for black. So once black plays here, now white's free to play this move, which if black answers it locally, this is going to strengthen black in the area, but white's got the 3-3 invasion in already, which means that once white has this exchange in, then it's going to be relatively easy for white to play something like this to make a ko out of it.
Sure.
And so there's making that aji establishing that possible ko in the corner at this point before playing this move was very well timed. And then black ignores that and plays this. This is a big move. It secures the corner and it starts to build a moyo on the right side of the board. So it's an important move. And white continues with the corner, the upper right corner. We saw white waste a co-threat on the left side of the board. This move here. It's just something AlphaGo does. I think it's limited to something like 2 moves per move or something like that, 2 minutes. I think the time control is not a full amount of time for the entire game. I think they have it playing a certain move in a certain number of minutes.
I see.
And so maybe sometimes it runs out of time and plays a forcing move like this. That's why you see AIs, I think they play at a fairly regular pace, usually. A fairly steady pace, instead of using a lot of time on one move. I think they're limited to a certain number of certain amount of time for each move. And white plays here. And this is starting to make a ko. I put in a lot of variations, actually, where black is trying to kill white. Like this would be a ko. This is the easy one. This one is a bit, it's just dangerous for black, just because of stuff that's going to happen on the outside. It's not going to work. I went a bit further in the SDF, but it's black is weak on the left side, and it's not going to work. So in the game, this is a really interesting move. This Kosumi is inviting white to live, but it's really difficult for white to live without making a ko out of it. Like white can play here, and this is alive. This is unconditionally alive, but it's really painful for white to be playing so smallly.
So
to make such
small.
small life. Yeah, so small.
It's like what, 3, maybe 4 points.
Maybe 4 points, yeah.
Yeah.
And so black is asking white at this point. Since black cannot kill this without a ko, and a ko would be bad for black, if we look at the overall position, white just has a lot of ko threats in the lower left area. So it's going to be very difficult for black to fight a ko here. So black is asking white, do you want to live outright with this painful move here? Or do you want to leave black the option of playing a ko? And there's some value to this Kosumi here because it's reducing white's eye space on the upper side. And so black is sort of preparing to chase white's group in the center a little bit.
That's nice.
And then white plays this move. So this move, it takes a bit of explaining, but it's a really beautiful move because white would, when white tries to live in the corner without playing this move, let's see, I've done a number. Like I've tried this one, white would like to be able to force with the Hanesugi. It's not forcing. Black actually plays Atari once here, and then here.
Whoa.
And this white group is going to die.
Oh, how cool.
And so white would have liked to play that Hanesugi because the move that white really wants to play, the move that white would like to be able to play, let's see if I put it in. White also so white wants to play the Hanesugi. Let's just put that variation in now. If black answers it, this would be a really neat way for white to live in the corner. It would be a lot more territory. So that's what white would like to aim at, since this is such a painful life. This would leave the ko at A. So playing here immediately would not be a outright living shape. And black would just leave this for a while. And maybe later in the game, black would have an advantage in ko threats. So black would wait for a good time to play A and start a ko. And so the next move white would think of is this move. This is what white would like to be able to do. But black's going to play here. And this is a squeeze. It just doesn't work for white. Oops.
Collapse.
Yeah. So so that gets us to white's attachment here. This attachment is setting up that move because locally black doesn't, like if black is going to answer it submissively with something like this, then white can play one of the more painful moves. Like even if white plays here, white's gotten a little extra from that Kikashi on top. So black ignores it. And locally this is an overplay for white, but this move has set up this move. Because now if black plays here, white's going to be able to cut. And that stone that white has there is making a big difference. So this is a collapse for black. So black cannot do that. If black plays here again, at this point in the game, a ko is going to favor white because white has all of these ko threats in the lower left, and actually this ko is pretty damaging to black when white wins it because the whole right side will disappear. And so this is a time where black has to back off and play here. And in this exchange, now white has the ideal life on the upper side and has actually reduced black's territory a little bit on the right side. And so has gained something like 10 points in that local area.
Mm-hmm.
And what black gets out of it is black gets to play this big move in the center.
Mm.
And so there's a sacrifice white has made in the center to get a big gain on the right side. And just because that move on the right side, playing here was such a painful shape, I tend to agree with AlphaGo that this is a lot better. So I really like the way that AlphaGo has played here to get an ideal shape in the upper right corner and giving something back in the center. I think it's a good trade for white. And black doesn't really have any choice. There's something to say for the choice that black made in the game because black does have a very nice shape in the center now. So it's an even trade maybe. And white starts to make eyes on the upper side. And here we see a big moyo developing on the right side. And white floats in from the center. And now black is going to try black is starting to try to attack white on the upper side still, and is trying to get an attack on this stone that white has just played in the center of the board. So black pushes through here. We can see an attack starting on the upper side. But actually white has some potential to live there, which I'm going to get into a bit later in the game. So white plays these forcing moves to get a little window out into the center there. So just barely white has some potential to get into the center. And now white can take Sente to reduce the right side.
Getting a little loosey-goosey up there, isn't it?
Yeah, white's playing very adventurously. I have the feeling that after living with such a big shape in the lower left, I sort of like the game for black. I think black has a slight advantage. And when that happens in these self-played AlphaGo games, AlphaGo, the side that is behind in territory, starts playing these very adventurous variations and a bit more strongly playing.
Okay.
And so, to get on with the game, black plays here. Now black's really putting pressure on white in the center.
Yeah.
Now this white group is not 100% alive.
I mean, okay, and I know it's not 100% alive. What percent alive is it, Michael? Because it looks like about 100% dead.
Yeah, when black actually tries to kill it, it gets a bit troublesome for black too. Black would want to play here, and white's gonna and after this, that stuff that white did in the upper right corner comes into play a little bit because white can play this move, and this has to do with white's life on the upper side. So like if black plays here, then this becomes a forcing move. I mean, of course, this one also becomes a forcing move, right? And so the way white lived in the upper right is coming into play here. And actually, this shape, although it looks a bit confusing, it's already a seki. Because if black plays this way, this is going to be a seki either way. This is bent 3 shape that is a seki. And you might wonder, what if black plays here? Because of that white stone on the first line, there's no way black can save the one stone.
Oh, that's so cool! I love that.
And so so that's why playing here is a good move because
doesn't it have a cool name? There's a cool Japanese name for that one you can throw in. I'll have to look it up.
You'll have to look it up. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And so black covers here, and now it's a bit more difficult for white to make a seki. I probably put too many variations in here, so let's just do this one. Yeah, and so when black plays like this, if black continues to surround white, white's going to be able to live easily. So let's have black try to kill white, and white can make this shape. White can make a ko there, and also white pushes through in the center. There's a lot of trouble for black here in the center. So this is a shape where locally it's turned into a ko, but there's just too much bad aji on the outside, and black's group on the outside is starting to fall apart at this point. So it's not really practically working for black. And so there's a lot of aji there, and it's going to depend on what happens in the center. But at this point, it's a bit difficult for black to continue to try to attack here. So black leaves it for the time being. And we can see from black's play here that I think if I attach a human emotion to this move, I get the feeling that black thinks it's ahead.
Okay.
Black has a good feeling about the game and is playing a solid move. And it's not a useless move. It is setting up some more attacks against the right side group. It's kind of a signal that black thinks it has an okay game. And white sends once, and then black with this move, I think black is trying to set up an attack. White plays this move. Now white is 100% alive, and black also plays another thick move in the center. And so these 2 points here were sort of interchangeable. Like if black had started with this move, white would have followed with this move anyway. So it is a very important move for black also to play this extension in the center, because it gives black a very strong position in the center. And it's a good base for black to try to continue attacking on the right. So I sort of agree with that move. And then in the game, white continues to strengthen the right side group with plays like this and then a play here. So white is playing conservatively here. Actually, if white had played on the lower side like this, at least momentarily, white's going to have a lead in territory. So I had a big question as to what if white plays here? And I think what's going to happen is this kind of thing. Actually, this looks like it's a pretty strong attack on white's group on the right side. So maybe this is just too much for white to try. And I have some doubt about it. It's really hard to figure out what's going to happen next. But I'm going to trust AlphaGo. Like I have this basic distrust of AlphaGo when it has all of these games to the smallest possible margin, the winning margin, like all of these half-point games. I sort of wonder if AlphaGo is just making them on purpose at some point. But I can't prove it, because if AlphaGo is doing that, it's doing it so early in the game. Like it's doing it at a point like this maybe, in which the game still has something like 150 moves or more to go. And there's no way it is just too much for me to try to solve the end. And so I can't prove that it's doing it anymore. Like I could prove it with the Master Series. And that was because the Master version was playing with shorter time limits. And so it was playing at a lower level, I would say. And actually, Master might have been significantly weaker than AlphaGo is in the KJ version.
Interesting.
But I'm not. I think one of the biggest differences is that it was playing at a shorter time limit in the Master series of games, and so its mistakes are easier to find, or if you call them mistakes. It was winning by something like 5.5 points, and it would turn that into a half-point win or something like that. And those were mistakes that I could point to, but they weren't losing moves. They weren't allowing
point losing moves.
They were point losing moves, but they weren't losing the game.
Right.
And so, to a certain extent, you could see that Master was controlling it. It wasn't like Master was making a real mistake, but Master was understanding that it was going to win anyway. It wasn't differentiating. It was making a choice to win by 0.5 point instead of a larger difference, which is the same thing for AlphaGo anyway. It doesn't care whether it wins by 0.5 point or 10.5 points. And so this is a point where I have some distrust of AlphaGo, but it's not something that I can prove. And so throughout this series, I'm going to be pointing to moves like that, which I have a feeling that they might not be the best move. They might not be the optimal move.
Well, but I wonder if it's an optimal move in terms of being. And I think we've seen this before, where it'll choose a move that locally may not be optimal, but that, it sort of simplifies the game.
Yeah, well, I've been saying it that way a lot. With the Master version, because it was playing with a relatively short time limit, I think it did actually need, to a certain extent, to simplify the game.
Sure.
And that's something that strong players often do.
Right.
When they know they're going to win, and the middle game is a point of the game where humans just can't read it out. Well, maybe we could if we sat down with a Go board and worked at it. But in the middle of a game, usually with a time limit, it's practically impossible to read out something like 150 moves of the game. And what a top player does when he's really in his prime and has a feeling for the game, he knows he's going to win. And that in itself is pretty difficult to do. But having this feeling and then being able to transform that middle game into an end game that is more easy to understand is a gift that all top players have. I'm talking about players leading their era. Like there would be like one player for each era of Go. Like I would name Hoinbo Shua, Hoinbo Dosaku, a few players in history, but there's usually one player who's on the top and giving. In the ancient times, he would be giving handicaps to most of the rest of the pros. And he has this feeling for the game that allows him to do that.
And that has to do, and maybe that's what applies here. Those are people who had a deeper understanding of the game than any of the other players, and so they
had an intuitive understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. So they could play in ways where maybe it just didn't make sense to other folks, but it made sense to them. And so I just wonder if that's part of what's going on, with AlphaGo. The AlphaGo.
Yeah. What I would say is that because of the shorter time limits, partly, and because I think maybe the Master version is weaker than the Kaje version, maybe Master needed to do that.
Right.
And
right.
top human players needed to do that. But I'm not sure that AlphaGo really needs to do that. I think AlphaGo is at a level, especially with this longer time limit, I think it's at a level where it has its positional judgment is so good that it's already understanding who's going to win at a very early era of the game.
So you're raising a question that you've raised before, which is, is AlphaGo simply trying to have a really, just a small margin as opposed to maximizing?
I sort of like to make that.
You're kind of sneaking up on it this time.
Yeah, I sort of like to do that. I'm sure that it's not really in the program, but it could be something that's sort of naturally happening. Because of the way AlphaGo finds the best moves. Because of course it's not trying to play a perfect game anyway. That's not the object of the program. It's trying to play good moves or reasonably good moves, and that's the way the whole program is set up. And one of the factors in that is it tries to find moves that gives it a move that gives it a good winning percentage.
Sure.
The value net gives a good percentage, and so maybe that is something to do with the fact that it sort of veers away from trying to win by large margins. I'd have to handle that with the various positions in which it does it, because it differs, I think, the way it's working. But it's probably just something that's sort of naturally happening because of the way the program chooses the good moves.
So in this game, Black had made a move just a few moves ago, basically, signaling that Black thought it was comfortable. Would you?
I was talking about this move. Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. I think that ever since Black lived in the lower left corner, that was an area where White spent a lot of moves to set up an attack on that Black group, and Black is the player who ended up with the corner territory. And so this was this life on the left side was pretty successful for Black. And the reason it worked so well is because of Black's play on the upper side, really, because I think the way that Black emphasized the upper side and forced White to answer Black on the upper side made it much easier. Since Black had sort of control of the center of the board after that, it made it a lot easier for Black to make a life on the left side. And so it was an example of AlphaGo's good positional judgment that was working better for Black in this case. And so I think that throughout the game, Black has a lead, But again, it's just too early in the game for me to give a number of points to that. And so we see white is playing a bit conservatively here, but because I feel this variation is a bit dangerous for white, I sort of agree that white should probably play this way. So I'm going to agree with AlphaGo there. You know, I could make a kind of a sinister AI thing that it's just playing games with us. But I don't really think, honestly, I don't think that's what's happening. And so again, these moves that AlphaGo plays that are forcing moves are really bad because they lose co-threats. And actually, it was game number 1. I was having trouble in that commentary because I couldn't find the losing move. You might recall that. And I found a candidate for the losing move. So I'm going to end up, when we do a book on this, or maybe I'll be editing the SDF files too. But I found a move that I think might have lost a point. But it was way early in the game, like it was 150 moves earlier in the game. And it was just one of these. It was one of these forcing moves that just gave away a point. And black gave away a point. And in the game variation, the Japanese rules would say that white won by 1.5 points. So in that variation, it didn't make any difference. So that's how I was missing it. But then I found a variation later in the game where white only wins by 0.5 point by the Japanese rules. And it's the same 1/4 of a point in the Chinese, 1/4 of a stone in the Chinese rules, but that 1 point loss that black took early in the game. And I remember in the video I was saying that was just another meaningless forcing move. When I looked at it, it was actually a 1 point losing move, which, and I found a variation later in the game. If we assume the rest of the game was played the same way, there was a point where black could have won by 0.5 point. So I'll do that maybe in the book.
So this raises 2 points. First of all, folks, you can see this is a game that we had already done the commentary on, and Michael was still bugging Michael, and he went back to try and find it. So this is the amount of detail that Michael goes into. But the other thing is that as he sort of slipped in there casually, but we are working on, you know, we've done these video commentaries, we've got these very detailed SGF files. But you know, people still do like the books, and so we are working on some. I think they're going to be ebooks that'll go along with these commentaries. We're just sort of working out some technical issues right now because we want to do some interesting things with the ebook. So I won't say more about it than that. But
yeah, well, there's going to be an ebook with SmartGo, yeah, and there's I think Slate and Shell is also doing something for us. So there's going to be a real book too.
Cool.
Yeah. And so now white plays here. I've sort of sneaked up to this move, which is really interesting. This is really a surprising move. But there's those stones that white has in the upper right corner, and there's a connection to them. Like if black plays here, white can extend. And it's going to be really big if white connects up to the upper right corner like this. So that's one of the variations. It's just a huge amount of territory that white is making there on the second line, because that's an eye, and also the reducible of black's territory. So that's pretty big. So this is sort of what white is aiming at. And if black plays here, white can play here. And in this case, there's the clamp at A, which will probably allow white to connect up to the upper right corner.
That's really annoying.
That's annoying, yeah. So black plays here, and this is a good move because if white just connects, black's going to be able to cut white off with this move. And this is much more efficient. If white plays this way, this is going to be really bad for white because black breaks through here. And this is going to be a collapse.
Yeah.
And so instead of answering the peep, white pulls back. And again, we can see that white is sort of just threatening to connect up on the right side. And although white's very low, all of those stones on the second and first lines, since white has an eye, it's all going to be white's territory. So this is pretty big, and so black cuts white off. And by playing this Kosumi late next, black played the Kosumi finally. This is actually better than covering. Like when black covers here and white plays here, white has that connection underneath. But when black plays like this next, it's better than that shape because now white cannot connect underneath. So there's a big difference there. So this is the better shape for black.
Here's a question: Are we in Endgame now, or are we still? I mean, it's sort of hard to tell here. I mean, it's only, I can't tell the move number here, but it feels only about halfway through. It's
127 moves. Black is still trying to attack white on the right side. This white group is not settled, but as soon as this white group settles, it's going to be endgame.
Okay.
So we're at the last stages of the middle game, and white is trying to sneak up on black. I think still black is ahead by a small margin. And so they're having this little infight here where white is trying to gain as many points as possible while making a life. And white did live here in a very efficient fashion. White now connects. It's important that white pushes through the, usually people bowl you out if you push through a bamboo joint like this.
Yes.
But white is filling a liberty for black. And since black is going to pull back here anyway, there's no damage done to white by this. And if we look at the result here, this clump of 6 black stones is put into Damismari by that exchange. So it's really important that white pushes through here once to give black that, to fill that liberty of the black stones, because it makes this move more effective. And so white's, again, taking some extra territory here, just saving everything. And now white has a potential life on the right side.
It was very cleverly done.
Was very cleverly done. White actually did gain a lot of territory in this exchange. So it was very well done way for white to live.
And what does black get out of this?
Well, black has something in the center. Black doesn't really gain very much. So again, but black is going to end up gaining something on the right side by capturing those 2 white stones. We'll see that happen. And black is gaining a little bit towards the center, which is an area where I would have expected white to be getting a lot of territory. White's potential there has been reduced a little bit. But again, it's the point where I have the feeling that white is getting more out of this than black. And so maybe it is a situation where black had a larger lead and black's lead is getting smaller as the game progresses. But when the game comes to a point where I can actually count the score, you might say, it turns out that black is winning anyway. So all of this is happening within a winning position for black. But I do have the feeling that black might be losing points. And so white's playing these moves to create a connection to the center so that white doesn't have to live on the side. Because white can live on the side with this move. So it's very simple for white to make a life. Like black connects, black doesn't connect. Black stops the connection here. If white connects here, let's do this one. If white takes the 1 stone, black can play like this, and this is bad for white because the corner is going to be a ko. So white can't do it that way.
Cool.
White has to connect here, and then after this, white can make a life on the right side with this exchange. So white has that method of living on the right side, but first plays towards the center to get some extra points in the center. And then saves these stones on the lower side. These were, black had a way to capture these stones. Like if white plays elsewhere, black's going to be able to capture these 3 stones in the center. So that's a purely, and also this move, it has something to do with the way white can escape in the center. And we'll see that happening in the game. So this has a double meaning. It's not just saving the 3 stones, it's also saving white in the center. Because now black takes away, this move is sort of fancy. It's a nice move. It can connect to the left or to the right. And so white just answers this way. And white still has a living shape. So that's something that's going to happen in the game. And again, if black cuts white off in the center, white's going to be able to live with that sequence I showed you before. So black plays here. And because of the shape in the corner, this is black's come most of the way to capturing those 3 white stones. So this is a big territorial move. And now white plays here. And we can see that that move that white played here, let's get back to it, yeah. This move here, it created an Atari on the 2 stones when white plays this move. And so this is going to create an extra eye for white when black plays this way, because white can play the Atari here and then make an eye with this exchange. So
nice. Very nice.
That's how that worked. And so black takes away that eye from white, and now white can escape in the center. Like if black tries to cut white off, white can play the Atari and play here, and black's in trouble because now white escapes, and we have this little semi-eye here, and black's going to lose. Black only has 2 liberties now, and white in the center has 3 liberties, so white's going to win this semi-eye. And so black backs away, and white can escape in the center. So this was all a very well-organized sequence that white played to make life in the center. It actually works, and it makes sense. And you see, it's much easier for me to tell you what's happening when one fight is happening at a time. And so you saw that happening in this game.
The last one, we had so many. It was such an exciting fight because just when you thought everything was winding down, then World War IV broke out.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with this relatively simple one. I'm sure we'll have more complicated ones as we go.
Okay, this is the final point where I have a problem with an AlphaGo move, because this is a point where I would play here, and this is forcing. So white has to play here, black plays here. And then if white plays towards the center, then this is a huge move. Like this is going to turn out like this, and the whole corner is going to be squeezed like this. So this is a bit painful for white. Otherwise, and then black would finish with this move. This is slightly better than the actual game. Otherwise, when black plays here, white has to play here. Otherwise, white could play here, and actually, this shape in the center here is going to resemble very much what happened in the actual game. So that black territory in the center is the same as the actual game, but it turns out black has cut white off on the left side. So this would be a little extra profit for black. And so I think this move is a little bit better than the game move, which was simply connecting here. A very small difference, but it would have been a little bit different. So you can see the same position here in the center.
Right.
And now we're in the end game. Now everything is, all the fighting is finished, and it's a very nice end game. It's a clear-cut end game for once. The AlphaGo didn't find a way to create some complicated ko. It usually finds a way to create a ko, but in this game it couldn't create a weird ko. It seems to go to great lengths to create a ko in the end game.
Any idea why?
Well, you know, in that game against Lee et al. 2 years ago, about 2 years ago now, there was that 4th game where Lee et al. Played this desperate move, and people are just too nice about it because it wasn't really a good move in itself. It wasn't going to work. And the Korean commentator was finding a way to refute it, and I was finding a different way to refute it. So there was 2 ways that AlphaGo could have played to refute that move, but they both involved reading out something like 40, 50, 60 move sequences.
Okay.
And that was just too much for AlphaGo, maybe because of the time controls or something. And AlphaGo went berserk. Like it started playing all of these.
I remember it was like a meltdown.
It was a meltdown, yeah.
Actually, I remember in the film, the guys are the guys in the control room are kind of beside themselves as it.
Yeah, and so I think the story is that the people at DeepMind decided that AlphaGo needed to be able to train to handle these complicated positions because it turned out that they felt that was the weak point that AlphaGo had, and also there was the fact that throughout the Lee et al. Match, AlphaGo was avoiding codes. It wasn't even taking back a code that would be easy. Like it was just allergic to codes. It was just keeping away from them, and people were commenting on that.
They were.
And in itself, it was a bad thing. And like it was losing opportunities by avoiding the codes. And so these were 2 projects, sort of, you might say, that the DeepMind people had, and I think they talked about it a little bit at Uchen, and the Chinese game against Koche. And what they did is they gave it a set of problems. They gave it positions that were extremely complicated, and they forced AlphaGo to study them or to use its networks to find the good moves. And so what happens is that it had this new set of data that it created by itself, in which it eventually found the best moves in complicated positions. And it got a kind of a, I suppose they made a huge data set. They must have made a huge data set full of these complicated variations by making AlphaGo do complicated positions over and over again, which gave it a set of moves that work well in complicated positions. And I think they actually said that in the press conference or something. I heard that in Ugin. And my slant on that, I think what the result was that AlphaGo got a very strong bias towards playing Kos and towards playing complicated positions because it had all of this practice in playing these positions. They started to look, the super complicated positions started to look normal to AlphaGo. And
almost,
so, right? Yeah.
No, it's almost like it developed a taste for them, right?
Yeah. So now the AlphaGo games in this 50-game series are much more, it's a lot more fighting than a human player would usually feel happy with, would feel confident with. Like the fighting is pretty wild. And I think that's a direct result of this training that they gave AlphaGo. That's my opinion on what they did with it.
It almost makes sense. I mean, if you see, I mean, I was just at the Go Congress, and of course, as usual, lots and lots of kids at the Go Congress, and you just watch them play, and they're playing Skittles games in between, Congress games, and they're just fighting all over the place, because they're kids and they love to fight, and I almost get that sort of feeling, perhaps, with AlphaGo, it can do this, so why not, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to spare you the details of the endgame, but it's really a beautiful endgame. And, it's a position which is so settled and there's no Kos to worry about, so you don't have to worry about co-threats. And you can just look at each move, at the size of each move. Let's just go back a little bit so I can say that. You just look at the size of each move, and both players are playing in the correct order. Like it's just a sequence of moves that can be valued locally, and you can give a local value to each move, a certain number of points. And the viewers who are interested in in-game positions could just look into this and look into each local move. Like this is a forcing sequence for black, but then you could look into the local moves like this one. That's a big move, and then this move here. This is forcing. And then you could count the size of this cut in the corner, and so in each case you would find that the earlier move is slightly larger than the following move. So they're playing the AlphaGo is playing these moves in an order of size, which makes sense. And the fact that there's no Kos and complicated positions to deal with makes it relatively easy to follow through the end game and set a value to each move, and see that AlphaGo is playing in the correct order. And so it's a good example of an endgame that's being played correctly by a strong player, or strong players, if you want to use the plural. And so I put a few variations in, but it's a pretty straightforward endgame up to a certain point. I might want to say one more thing at the end. This is for players like myself who are used to the Japanese rules. There's something weird that's going to happen towards the end. But it makes a lot of sense in the context of the Chinese rules. Because as they finish the game, at this point, they have a Ko on the right side. Yeah. And okay, that's the Ko where black played here and white covered. So there's that Ko on the right side.
Sure. Right.
And then there's a Ko in the lower right corner. And there's a 1-point move.
Yeah.
So naturally, a Japanese player would play the 1-point move, right?
Absolutely.
You don't want to start with the final Kos. You start with a 1-point move. So you would play here. And actually, this is this is the better move in actual practice. But it's interesting because AlphaGo plays the ko first. And in Chinese rules, sometimes it's important to settle the kos first. And so it's sort of an example of that. Like white plays the 1-point move, and it turns out black has enough ko threats anyway, so black can go ahead and play this ko. And the position is that even if white wins this ko in the lower right corner, black will win by half a point in Japanese rules. And in Chinese rules, it's going to be 1.5 points anyway. So it doesn't really make any difference to the win-loss result. And so in Chinese rules, at this point, if black did not have enough ko threats, black would just start filling dame points. And we would end up with this kind of position anyway. Like in this order, white can win the ko, but also if black plays here first, again, in this case also, it's the same position. So if black doesn't want to fight the ko, it would be an option for black to start with a dame point. And then what happens in this point is AlphaGo actually is white tries it. If white can fill all the dame and win this ko at the same time, if white can fill all the dame and win the ko at the same time, then there's potential for white to fill an extra dame. And in Chinese rules, that would make a difference. So that's something strange that sometimes happens in Chinese rules. And you see white sort of trying to win the ko, but in this case, white didn't have enough ko threats. So from the viewpoint of Japanese rules, white lost a point here, but it's the same 1.5 point result when you're looking at the Chinese rules. So that's the end of the game. Those players, the viewers who enjoy endgames, are going to really enjoy this endgame because it's a very well-ordered endgame, and you can you can usually attach a local value to each local move. So it's going to be, your players are going to be able to judge that AlphaGo is playing in the correct sequence.
But another thing to think about here, folks, is that I think a lot of folks, even some stronger amateur players, don't pay as much attention to the end game as maybe we should. It can be, as you've just shown in looking at that very quickly, fairly painstaking. You have to look at values, you have to look at sequences. And it can be, I remember you had said, it was a while ago now, but that point when you had spent a year and a half just working on building up your endgame muscles.
I think it was more than that. Yeah, longer. Maybe 2 or 3 years at least.
Yeah.
Because I had a weak endgame at one point, and I had to work on it. And endgame, a lot of endgame is just reading correctly. But also you have to have a good system of attaching values to the move. So there's when you're trying to read out a whole sequence, there's memory that gets into it also, I suppose. So you have to have a visual memory of the board's position.
Yeah.
So there was some training I did, and it's very, very important on the professional level. I think that Don level amateurs can gain a lot from it too. And it's probably, the technical parts of it can be a bit difficult for Q players maybe, but yeah. And so it's if you enjoy it, then it's really rewarding because there's a real difference.
It reminds me of life and death problems. It's the same sort of thing. I mean, they're calculable problems. You can actually, it is something you can figure out. There is an answer. Sometimes, frankly, and we're seeing this now, with these AlphaGo openings. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, some of these moves in the opening, I think, are very difficult to understand. Whereas, with a Sumego or an endgame problem, there's an answer. It's worth X amount of points, right? Right.
And looking at the rest of AlphaGo's game, which is so strong, I would sort of assume that maybe it's got some good ideas about the opening too, but it's just hard for me to understand. So, yeah.
But you're going to keep on trying.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that. Well, as always, a really wonderful analysis and thorough. And I think it's good to be back in the saddle and getting the series restarted again. And we look forward to the next games. And so we will, as I said at the beginning, the plan at this point is to release a new one each Friday. Well, to the extent that we can, we will stick to that. And with that, we'll call it a day for this game. As always, thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.